The distress beacon had been silent for 6 hours before Dorian Ash found the courage to fly toward it. Silence meant one of two things in the Kasari drift: either the ship had been picked clean already, or whoever answered the call would find something they couldn't unsee. Dorian had spent 11 years salvaging in contested space, long enough to know that the second kind of silence had a particular texture to it, a stillness that pressed against the hull like a held breath. He almost turned the rusted promise around twice. The convoy had been civilian. That much was obvious from a click out, when his sensors started painting the wreckage field on his console. Transport haulers, not warships, their hulls marked with the pale blue chevron of a refugee registry. 6 ships, maybe 7. Now debris fields spinning slow and silent under the dead light of a binary star nobody had bothered to name. "Talk to me, Mabel," Dorian said to his ship's aging AI core, easing the throttle back as he threaded between a tumbling engine nacelle and a hull section still venting frost into vacuum. "Tell me there's nothing alive out here so I can go home and pretend I never got this call." "I'm reading atmospheric integrity in the forward third of Hauler 6. Mabel replied, her voice carrying the same dry patience she'd had since Dorian bought her second-hand from a decommissioned mining rig 8 years back. "Faint life signs. 1. Possibly organic, possibly just my sensors being old and stupid like the rest of this ship. Don't insult yourself in front of the client. There is no client, Dorian. There's just you, doing the thing you always do, which is fly toward the worst possible situation because leaving feels worse." He didn't answer that, because she wasn't wrong. He suited up in the cramped airlock, checked his tether twice out of habit, and pushed off into the field. Debris drifted past him in the merciless quiet, a child's shoe, tumbling end over end. A cracked photo frame, the image inside long since sublimated by vacuum exposure. A single glove, fingers still curled as though someone had been reaching for something when the end came. Dorian had seen war wreckage before. He'd never gotten used to the shoes. Hauler 6 was a wreck of a wreck, its spine buckled where something, a mass drive around, judging by the burn pattern, had cut clean through midship. But the forward section had sealed itself off automatically, an old failsafe doing its one last job before the crew that built it were gone. Dorian cycled the manual airlock crank until his shoulders burned, and the door groaned open into a pocket of frozen, breathable dark. His suit lights swept the compartment. Overturned crates. A medical cot with restraint straps still buckled empty. Frost blooming across every surface like pale fur. And in the corner, wedged between a bulkhead and a shattered supply locker, a small shape. He almost mistook her for another piece of the wreckage. She was that still, that small, curled into herself with her tail wrapped around her knees like a blanket. Orange fur, matted with soot and frost, 2 rounded ears pressed flat against her skull. She was clutching something to her chest with both arms, gripping it the way you'd grip the only solid thing left in a world that had stopped making sense. Dorian froze in the doorway. Then her eyes opened. They were amber. A color he hadn't known existed until he saw it reflected back at him in his suit lights, wide and wet and terrified. She flinched hard against the wall, a small whimper escaping her before she could stop it, and Dorian raised both hands slowly, palms out, the universal signal he hoped translated across species. "Hey," he said, and his voice cracked on the word, thick behind his helmet's speaker. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stared at him with those enormous amber eyes, her small chest heaving too fast, too shallow, the beginning of shock, maybe, or just a child who had run out of anything but fear to feel. Dorian crouched down slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, bringing himself to her eye level. "My name's Dorian," he said. "I've got a ship. It's warm. It's got food, and blankets, and it doesn't have any holes in it, which is more than I can say for this place." Still nothing. But her grip on the object in her arms loosened, just slightly enough that he could see it now, a small stuffed fox, threadbare at the ears, one button eye missing, clearly loved into near ruin by years of small hands. "That's a good fox," Dorian said softly. Does he have a name? Her lips trembled. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer at all, that the fear had swallowed whatever words she might have had left. Then, in a voice so small he almost missed it through the soot calm, she asked the only question that mattered to her in that frozen, broken place. Have you seen my mommy? Dorian Ashe had faced down pirate boarding parties. He talked his way out of 3 different bounty hunter contracts, and once negotiated with a Drenic warlord over the price of scrap titanium, while the man's honor guard held rifles on him. None of it had prepared him for the way that question hit him. A small, hopeful, devastating thing, asked by a child who didn't yet understand that some questions don't have answers you want to give. I haven't, he said honestly, because he wasn't going to lie to her, not about this, not ever. But I'm going to help you find out what happened to her. I promise you that. Okay? She studied him for a long moment, amber eyes searching his face with an intensity that seemed too old for whatever her age was. 6, maybe 7, in human years, if Vulpine development ran anything close to comparable. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, Dorian said, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. I'm going to need you to hold on to me, all right? Real tight. Can you do that? She unfolded from her corner like something fragile coming back to life, and when he lifted her, she weighed almost nothing, a bird-bone lightness that made his chest ache. She buried her face against his shoulder and gripped his suit with small clawed hands, the stuffed fox trapped between them. What's your name? Dorian asked as he carried her back toward the airlock, moving as gently as he could through the wreckage. A pause. Then, muffled against his shoulder. Fun. Just fun? Fun, she repeated like that settled it. Okay, Finn, Dorian said. Let's get you somewhere warm. He didn't find the pendant until 3 hours later, after he'd gotten her out of her torn thermal suit and into one of his old shirts that swallowed her whole, after he'd fed her recycled protein broth that she ate like she hadn't eaten in days, after she'd finally fallen asleep curled in the corner of his bunk with the stuffed fox tucked under her chin. It had slipped free of her collar while he adjusted the blanket over her. A small ornate disc on a chain, warm from her body heat, engraved with a crest he didn't recognize. 9-pointed star wrapped in stylized foxtails, rendered in gold-white metal that looked far too fine, far too deliberately crafted, to belong to any refugee child. Mabel, he said quietly, holding the pendant up to the cabin light. Scan this for me. A pause, longer than Mabel's processing usually took. Dorian, she said finally, and there was something careful in her voice that made the hair on his arms stand up. That crest belongs to House Kestrel. The Vulpine royal line. Dorian looked down at the pendant, then at the small sleeping shape in his bunk, soot-streaked fur, a missing button eye on her stuffed fox, a child who'd asked him if he'd seen her mommy in a voice that still echoed in his chest. You're telling me, he said slowly, that the entire Vulpine kingdom is looking for this kid. I'm telling you, Mabel said, that the entire galaxy is looking for this kid. Dorian, the Vulpine Queen's daughter has been missing for 11 days. It's been on every emergency channel from here to the Kastari Reach. Both the kingdom and the Ashen Dominion have mobilized fleets to search for her. There are bounties posted. Serious ones. Dorian sat down slowly on the edge of the bunk, careful not to wake her, and looked at the little girl sleeping with her tail curled protectively around the stuffed fox. Well, he said quietly, that's a problem. By morning, Finn had started talking, not much, not easily, but enough that Dorian began to understand the shape of the last 2 weeks of her small life. There were bad ships. She told him over a breakfast of reconstituted eggs that she picked at more than 8. Loud ones. Mommy said to hide in the crate room and not come out no matter what. Did you see what happened to her? Dorian asked gently, crouched across the small galley table from her. Finn shook her head, ears drooping. I heard yelling. Then it got quiet. Then I was cold. Her small hands tightened around her mug of warm broth. I looked for her. I looked everywhere. But everyone was She stopped, her chin trembling, and didn't finish. Dorian reached across the table, resisting the urge to pull her into a hug she hadn't asked for, and instead just rested his hand near hers, close enough to take if she wanted it, far enough not to force it. "We're going to find out what happened," he said. "And we're going to get you somewhere safe. I promise." She looked up at him with those amber eyes still red-rimmed from crying in the night, and something in her small face shifted, not quite trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. The fragile first foothold of a child deciding to believe an adult again. "Okay, mister," she said. It was the first time she called him that. It wouldn't be the last. The trouble started 4 hours later, when Mabel's proximity alarm chimed with the particular urgency Dorian had learned to dread. "2 ships dropping out of transit lane, bearing on our position," Mabel reported. "Configuration matches Ashen Dominion long-range scouts. They're running dark, no transponder broadcast, which means they don't want to be logged in this system." Dorian's stomach dropped. Could be coincidence. It could be. Mabel agreed. It could also be that Dominion salvage crews monitor the same emergency beacon frequencies we do, and they've had 11 days to get very, very motivated about finding a certain missing princess. Finn, curled in the co-pilot's seat with a blanket around her shoulders, looked up sharply at the word princess, her ears flattening. "Are they looking for me?" Dorian hesitated a half-second too long, and her small face crumpled with understanding. "They are," she whispered. "They're the bad ships. They're not going to get you," Dorian said, and there was a steel in his voice he hadn't planned, hadn't expected, but meant with a certainty that surprised him. "I promise you that." He hauled the rusted promise into a hard burn away from the wreckage field, angling for the nearest transit corridor, and prayed to whatever was listening that his old ship had one more sprint left in her. "They've adjusted course to intercept," Mabel said. "Dorian, they're faster than us." "Everything's faster than us, Mabel, that's not new information. I'm being descriptive, not helpful, I know. There's a debris corridor 200 clicks off our starboard bow. The rest of the convoy wreckage. If we can get into it before they close the gap, the sensor clutter might buy us time." "Do it." The rusted promise groaned as Dorian pushed her past every safety threshold she had, weaving between tumbling hull sections and drifting cargo containers with a recklessness that would have terrified him on any other day, with any other cargo. Finn gripped her stuffed fox with both hands, eyes squeezed shut, small body braced against the seat as the ship bucked and shuddered around them. "I've got you," Dorian said, more to himself than to her, hands steady on the controls even as his heart hammered. "I've got you, kid, just hold on." Behind them, the Dominion scouts opened fire. Not at the ship, Dorian realized with cold clarity as the shots went wide, but into the debris field itself, trying to flush them out or force a collision they could exploit. A support strut exploded 30 meters off their port side, sending a spray of molten shrapnel across the rusted promise's shields. "Shields at 60%, Mabel reported, calm despite the situation in a way that Dorian both appreciated and found deeply unsettling. "We are not built for this kind of excitement, Dorian." "Neither am I. Where's that transit corridor?" 40 seconds. 40 seconds had never felt so long. Dorian threaded the ship through a gap between 2 colliding hull fragments with barely 3 meters of clearance on either side, Finn's small whimper barely audible over the groan of stressed metal, and then transit lane achieved. Jumping in 3-2. The stars smeared into light, and the rusted promise tore free of the system, leaving the wreckage field and the Dominion scouts behind in the silent dark. Dorian let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his chest since he'd first heard the distress beacon. He looked over at Finn, who had opened her eyes and was staring at him with something between terror and awe. "You're really fast," she said, in a small, shaky voice. Dorian laughed, a startled, relieved sound. "The ship's really fast when I'm desperate. Remember that." She managed a small, watery smile, the first he'd seen from her. It didn't last long, but it was there, and Dorian found himself filing it away like something precious. They made planetfall 6 hours later on Cinder's Hollow, a mining outpost too poor and too remote to interest anyone but desperate refugees and desperate salvagers. Which made it, in Dorian's professional opinion, exactly the kind of place where two people running from a galactic manhunt could disappear for a night. "We need information," he told Mabel as he guided the ship down through Cinder's Hollow's thin, dusty atmosphere. "Somebody in that convoy survived. Somebody knows what happened to the Queen. And I am not equipped to raise a lost princess on protein broth and hope. There's a relief station in the lower settlement," Mabel said. "Registered with the Kestari Refugee Compact. If anyone from Holler 6 convoy made it out, that's where they'd have been processed." "Good. That's our first stop." He glanced back at Finn, who had fallen into an exhausted doze against the window, her tail curled around her like a second blanket, the stuffed fox pressed to her cheek. In sleep, some of the fear smoothed out of her small face, and she looked, for just a moment, like any tired child anywhere in the galaxy. Not a princess, not a bounty, not the reason two empires had mobilized their fleets. Just a kid who missed her mother. Dorian felt something tighten in his chest, fierce and unfamiliar, and he made himself a second promise, quieter than the first, one he didn't say aloud. "Whatever it takes. I'm not letting anything happen to her." Cinder's Hollow's relief station was a squat prefab structure at the edge of the mining settlement, its walls lined with cots and its air thick with the particular exhaustion of a place that had seen too many people arrive with too little. Dorian left Finn aboard the rusted Promise with Mabel keeping watch over the girl's quiet protest, and made his way inside alone. The woman running the station, a weathered human named Priya who'd clearly seen enough war refugees to have gone past shock into something more like grim efficiency, listened to his careful, deliberately vague questions about a convoy that hit trouble near the Kasari Drift, with narrowed eyes. "You're not the first to ask," Priya said, arms crossed. "Dominion agents came through 2 days ago asking the same thing. Real polite about it. Real interested in whether anyone survived Holler 6 specifically." Dorian kept his expression carefully neutral. "Did anyone?" Priya studied him for a long moment, the kind of look that weighed a person's worth in silences. "There's a Vulpine woman in the back. Crew member, not military. She won't talk to the Dominion types. Might talk to you, if you're not one of them. I'm not. That's what they all say." But she jerked her head toward a curtained-off cot at the rear of the station anyway. "Go easy. She's been through hell. The Vulpine woman." Russet furred, an arm in a medical brace, one ear torn nearly in half, flinched hard when Dorian approached, until he raised his hands the same way he had for Fun and spoke in the same low, careful voice. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I found a little girl in the wreckage of Holler 6. Orange fur, amber eyes. Calls herself Fun. I need to know what happened." The woman's breath caught, her remaining good eye going wide. "Fun, she's alive?" "She's alive. She's safe for now. But I need to know who she is, and what happened to her mother, because 2 empires are apparently tearing the galaxy apart looking for her." The woman, she gave her name as Sorrel, a junior aide on the Queen's personal staff, told the story in halting, painful fragments. The convoy had been the Queen's own diplomatic envoy, traveling under deep cover to negotiate a ceasefire with a neutral faction, the Queen herself disguised among the crew to avoid exactly the kind of ambush that found them anyway. Someone had leaked the convoy's route. The attack had been surgical, professional, not random raiders but a strike team that knew exactly what ship to hit and exactly when. "The Queen ordered Finn hidden the moment the alarm sounded," Sorrel said, her voice cracking. "She went back for the command crew herself. I don't know if she made it to an escape pod. I was already unconscious by the time our section blew." "Is she alive?" Dorian asked, the question feeling too large for the small tent around them. Sorrel's ears drooped low. "I don't know. No one knows. That's why the search hasn't stopped. The kingdom won't declare her dead until they have proof, and the Dominion wants to find Finn before anyone else does, because a princess in Dominion custody is a war-ending bargaining chip. Or a war-starting one, depending on what they intend to do with her. Dorian felt cold settle into his stomach. What do you mean? I mean, Sorrel said quietly, that the Ashen Dominion has been losing this war for 3 years. A dead princess, found in Dominion territory, blamed convincingly enough on the kingdom's rivals. That's the kind of tragedy that could turn losing into winning. There are people who would see this war ended by finishing what that strike team started. Dorian sat back, the weight of what he'd stumbled into pressing down on him with sudden, suffocating clarity. He wasn't just protecting a lost child anymore. He was standing between a war and the spark that could reignite it into something unstoppable. Where would the Queen's forces be searching? He asked. If she's alive, if there's any chance, where would I need to take Finn to get her somewhere actually safe? Sorrel gave him a name. A hidden outpost in neutral space, the Kastari reaches Hollow Star Waypoint, a refugee sanctuary maintained by loyalists that even the Dominion spies hadn't fully mapped. Tell them Sorrel of the Emberwing sent you. Tell them you have the Little Ember. They'll know what that means. The Little Ember? Sorrel's expression softened for the first time since he'd sat down. It's what the crew called her. Because she never stopped smiling, even when everyone around her had forgotten how. Dorian thought of the small, terrified girl huddled in a wrecked cargo hold, asking if he'd seen her mommy, and something in his chest ached at the image of a child who used to never stop smiling. I'll get her there, he said. Whatever it takes. He returned to the rusted promise to find Finn awake, curled in the pilot's chair with Mabel's holographic display dimmed low, listening to something that sounded suspiciously like Mabel telling her a story about asteroid mining gone wrong. You're back, Finn said, sitting up so fast her ears nearly caught the seat restraint. Did you find out about my mommy? Dorian crouched down to her level, weighing honesty against the fragile hope in her eyes, and chose the version that was true without being crueler than it had to be. I found someone who was on your ship, he said. She doesn't know for sure what happened to your mom. But she told me somewhere your mom's people might be looking for both of you. If we go there, we might find answers. Okay? Finn's small face went through a complicated sequence of emotions, hope, fear, hope again, before settling into a determined nod. Okay. Let's go there. It's a long trip, Dorian warned. And it might be dangerous. Finn looked up at him with a seriousness that seemed too heavy for such a small face. You said you'd help me find out what happened. You promised. I did, Dorian agreed. And I'm not going back on it. She held up the stuffed fox toward him, offering it with both hands, an act so unexpected that Dorian didn't know what to do with it for a moment. His name's Pharaoh, she said. He keeps people safe. You can hold him if you're scared. Something in Dorian's chest cracked open, warm and aching all at once. He took the small worn stuffed animal with a gentleness that surprised him, cradling it like it actually mattered, because in that moment, to her, it did. Thank you, he said, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. I feel safer already. Finn smiled. A real one this time, small and bright and utterly unguarded, and something settled into place in Dorian's chest that he didn't have a name for yet, but that felt suspiciously, terrifyingly, like the beginning of love. The journey to Hollow Star Waypoint took 9 days through contested space, and every one of them taught Dorian something new about the small orange-furred girl who had appended his life. She was, he learned, ferociously curious, asking Mabel 100 questions an hour about how the engines worked, why the stars looked different from different systems, whether foxes could fly if they had big enough ears. She had a laugh that came rarely but landed like sunlight when it did. She hummed to herself when she thought no one was listening, snatches of a lullaby Dorian didn't recognize but that Mabel, after some quiet research, identified as an old Vulpine cradle song about a mother fox guiding her kids home by starlight. She also had nightmares. The first one hit on the third night, a thin, panic scream that had Dorian out of his bunk and across the cabin before he was fully awake, finding Finn thrashing against her blankets, tears streaming down her small face even as she slept. "Mommy!" she gasped. "Mommy, wait! Hey! Hey, Finn, you're safe!" Dorian knelt by her bunk, careful not to grab her too suddenly, remembering somewhere in the panic that startling a frightened child could make things worse. "You're on the ship. You're safe." Her eyes snapped open, wild and unseeing for a terrible half-second before they focused on him, and then she was scrambling forward, small arms wrapping around his neck with a desperate strength that nearly knocked him backward. "I couldn't find her," she sobbed against his shoulder. "I looked and I couldn't find her." Dorian held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other rubbing slow circles against her small trembling back, and said the only thing he could think to say. I know, sweetheart. I've got you. You're safe. I've got you." He didn't know when sweetheart had slipped into his vocabulary. He didn't examine it too closely. He just held her until her sobs quieted into hiccuping breaths, until her small body went slack with exhausted sleep against his chest, and he sat on the floor of his cabin with a sleeping princess in his arms and understood, with a clarity that scared him, that he would burn the galaxy down before he let anything hurt her again. They weren't alone in the dark for long. On the 6th day, Mabel's sensors picked up a ship shadowing them at the edge of detection range. Careful, patient, professional in a way that raised every alarm Dorian had. "Bounty hunter," Mabel said grimly, after running the ship's silhouette through 3 separate databases. "Registered under the name Vex Draven. Independent contractor, no fleet affiliation, which means whoever's paying doesn't want an official trail. He's good, Dorian. He's not going to lose us by accident. Then we lose him on purpose," Dorian said, already pulling up star charts. "Tell me there's somewhere to hide in this sector. There's an ion storm forming 2 systems over. Nasty one, strong enough to scramble most sensor arrays, weak enough that we could probably ride it out if I baby the shields the whole way through." "Probably?" "I didn't want to lie to you, Dorian, that seemed rude given the circumstances." He almost laughed, despite everything, despite the fear coiling tight in his gut. "Do it. Plot the course." Fen, curled in the co-pilot's seat with Pharaoh clutched to her chest, watched him with wide, worried eyes. "Is it the bad ships again?" "Just one this time," Dorian said, trying for reassuring and landing somewhere closer to Grim. "But he's a good pilot. We're going to need to do something a little scary to lose him. You ready?" Finn's small jaw set with a determination that reminded him, achingly, of the description Sorrel had given him, a girl who never stopped smiling. "I'm ready." "I trust you, mister." Those 3 words hit him harder than any weapon's fire had. "I trust you." Freely given, from a child who had every reason in the galaxy not to trust anyone anymore. "Then hold on to Pharaoh tight," Dorian said, throat tight. "Here we go." The ion storm swallowed them whole 20 minutes later, the rusted promise bucking through violent cross-currents of charged particles that turned Mabel's sensor displays into useless static and lit the void outside the viewport in sickly, flickering greens and purples. Dorian flew half-blind, trusting instinct and 11 years of dodging worse than this, weaving the ship through turbulence that threw Finn hard against her restraints and had alarms shrieking across every console. "Shields at 40%, Mabel warned. 30. "Dorian, we cannot take much more of this. Just a little further." The storm spat them out on the far side in a spray of dissipating static, the rusted promise groaning like a wounded animal but intact, and behind them, nothing. No pursuing signature. No hunter. "We lost him," Mabel confirmed, something like relief audible even in her synthesized voice. "Or he lost interest in following us into a storm that could have torn his ship apart. Either way, we're clear." Dorian sagged back in his seat, hands shaking slightly on the controls, and looked over at Finn, pale, wide-eyed, but grinning at him with fierce, giddy relief. "We did it!" she said, bouncing slightly against her restraints. We beat the bad ship. We did. Dorian agreed, laughing despite the adrenaline still hammering through his veins. You did great, kid. Real brave. She beamed at him, and Dorian thought, not for the first time, that he would do this 1,000 times over. Outrun fleets, dive through storms, risk everything he had, just to keep that particular light in her eyes. Hollow Star Waypoint hung in the black at the edge of a nebula too radioactive for casual travel, a sprawling patchwork of docked ships and salvaged hull sections that had grown, over years, into something between a refugee camp and a fortress. Dorian felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly as Mabel confirmed the outpost's defensive systems, its neutral space status, its reputation as a place the war hadn't fully touched. He should have known better than to relax. The docking clerk who processed their arrival was polite, professional, utterly unremarkable. Right up until Dorian mentioned Sorrel's name and the phrase Little Ember, and the man's eyes flicked, just for a fraction of a second, toward a calm panel in a way that made every instinct Dorian had honed over 11 years of dangerous salvage work scream in alarm. Give me a moment to verify your credentials, the clerk said smoothly, already reaching for the panel. Standard procedure. Of course, Dorian said, keeping his voice easy even as his hand drifted, casual and unhurried, toward the sidearm holstered at his hip. Mabel's voice crackled low in his earpiece, audible only to him. Dorian, that comm frequency he just accessed isn't outpost security. I'm reading an encrypted burst transmission off network. Someone here is selling you out. Dorian's blood went cold. He didn't look at the clerk. He didn't look at Finn, standing close beside him with ferro clutched tight, sensing without understanding that something had shifted in the air. We need to go, he murmured, low enough that only she would hear, already turning them both back toward the docking corridor. Right now, sweetheart. Stay close. They made it 11 meters before the corridor lights flickered and 3 figures stepped out from a side passage, weapons already raised. Not outpost security, but mercenaries in unmarked armor, professional and utterly without hesitation. Dorian Ashe, the lead mercenary said, voice flat through a helmet vocoder. Hand over the girl, and you walk away with your ship intact. That's more generosity than you'll get from us twice. Dorian pushed from behind him without thinking, putting his own body between her and the leveled weapons, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. She's not cargo, he said, voice steady despite the fear clawing up his spine. She's a kid. And you're not touching her. Sentiment, the mercenary said, almost bored. Won't stop a plasma round. Finn's small hand fisted in the back of Dorian's jacket, and he could feel her trembling, hear her breath coming fast and panicked, and something in him went very cold and very clear, the particular calm that came from having exactly one option left. Mabel, he said quietly. Emergency beacon. Send it to the outpost's actual security network, not the corrupted channel. Now. Sending. Dorian, whatever you're about to do, just do it. He didn't have a plan beyond keep her alive. He didn't have a weapon that could win this fight. What he had was a corridor full of shipping crates from the docking bay's cargo overflow, stacked haphazardly along the walls, and 11 years of instinct that had kept him alive through worse odds than this. Fun. He breathed barely a whisper. When I say run, you run for the ship. Don't look back. Mabel will get the ramp open. I'm not leaving you. You have to trust me, Dorian said, and something in his voice must have carried the desperate weight of the promise behind it, because she stopped arguing, small jaw trembling but set. Okay, she whispered. Okay, mister. He grabbed the nearest crate and shoved it hard into the mercenary's path, the heavy container crashing down between them in a chaos of scattering cargo that bought exactly the half-second of confusion he needed. Run! Finn bolted. Dorian dove the opposite direction, drawing fire away from her small fleeing shape, rolling behind a support column as plasma bolts scorched the wall where he'd stood a moment before. His own weapon felt absurdly inadequate against 3 armored mercenaries, But he fired anyway, forcing them to duck for cover, buying seconds, just seconds, anything to get her clear. "She's aboard," Mabel reported, tense. "Ramp ceiling. Dorian, get back here!" A plasma bolt seared across his shoulder, spinning him hard into the bulkhead, pain exploding white-hot down his arm. He bit back a scream, forced himself upright, forced his legs to keep moving even as blood soaked hot through his jacket. Then the corridor lights shifted from amber to red, and a new voice boomed across the outpost's speaker system. Actual outpost security, alerted by Mabel's emergency beacon, converging fast. The mercenaries broke off, melting back into the outpost's crowded passages with the professional efficiency of people who knew when a job had gone sideways. Dorian didn't wait to see them go. He staggered the last 30 meters to the rusted Promise's open ramp, half collapsing onto the deck as Mabel sealed the hatch behind him, and the engines spun up to emergency thrust. "Dorian!" Finn's voice, high and terrified, and then small hands were on him, pressing frantically against the burn on his shoulder like she could hold the pain closed through sheer force of will. You're hurt, mister, please." "I'm okay," Dorian gasped, which was a lie, but the good kind, the kind meant to keep a terrified child from falling apart. "I'm okay, Finn. We're okay. We got away." She was crying, he realized, hard, silent sobs that shook her whole small frame, her hands still pressed to his wound like she was trying to keep him from disappearing the way her mother had. "You said you'd get me home," she wept. "You can't get hurt. You promised." Dorian pulled her into his good arm, holding her close despite the fire in his shoulder, pressing a kiss to the top of her head without thinking, the gesture as natural as breathing. "I keep my promises," he said, voice rough. "I'm not going anywhere. I've got you." They didn't dock again for 2 days, running dark through the safest transit lanes Mabel could plot while Dorian's shoulder healed under a medical patch that itched worse than the burn had hurt. Finn barely left his side the entire time, curling up against him during the long silent hours, watching him with an anxious vigilance that broke his heart every time he caught her at it. "Somebody sold us out," Dorian said quietly to Mabel, once Finn had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep on the bunk beside him. "That clerk knew exactly who to call. Which means Sorrel's contact, the whole network Sorrel sent us to, might be compromised. Or the leak is somewhere higher up," Mabel said grimly. "Dorian, I've been running quiet analysis on the attack pattern from the beginning. The strike on the Queen's convoy. The bounty hunter who found us despite running dark. The mercenaries at Hollowstar, who somehow knew you specifically by name, and knew to expect the Little Ember phrase." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone with access to very sensitive kingdom intelligence is feeding information to whoever wants Finn dead or captured. And I don't think it's a low-level clerk making those calls. I think whoever it is has been tracking Finn's exact movements since the moment you pulled her out of that wreckage." Dorian looked down at the sleeping child curled against his side, small and impossibly vulnerable, and felt something harden in his chest. A protective fury he hadn't known himself capable of. "Then we stop trusting anyone's directions," he said. "We find the Queen ourselves. No more waypoints. No more contacts. Just us. That's a galaxy-sized haystack to search, Dorian. Then we start narrowing it down," he said. "Because I am not losing this kid to anyone's war." It took another 11 days of careful, deliberate movement, false trails laid through minor trade stations, actual course changes plotted only once they were already in transit, every precaution Dorian's paranoid instincts could dream up, before they found something resembling solid ground. A rumor passed through a network of salvagers and free traders that Dorian had built relationships with over a decade of honest dealing, that a fleet bearing the Kestrel Royal Seal had been sighted holding position near the Vaith Nebula, searching a debris field with a desperation that suggested they, too, were looking for something precious and lost. "It's a risk," Mabel said, as Dorian input the coordinates. "If that fleet's compromised the same way the outpost was." "Then we'll know fast," Dorian said. But I don't think a royal war fleet is easy to infiltrate the way a refugee waypoint's comm system was. This is our best shot, Mabel. I can feel it. Finn, listening from the co-pilot's seat with Pharaoh in her lap, looked up at him with cautious, hopeful eyes. Is that where my mommy is? Dorian crouched beside her chair, meeting her gaze with as much honesty as he could offer. I don't know for sure. But it's the best lead we've got. Are you ready to find out? She nodded, small and solemn, gripping Pharaoh tight. I'm ready. The Vaith Nebula fleet turned out to be real, and turned out, to Dorian's enormous relief, to be exactly what it claimed to be: 6 kingdom warships arranged in a careful search pattern around a debris field, their hull markings unmistakably authentic, their sensor sweeps thorough and unhurried in the way of forces that had given up finding survivors and started searching for remains instead. Dorian hailed them with his transponder broadcasting wide open. No more hiding, no more caution, just a desperate gamble that honesty, finally, would be believed. This is the independent salvage vessel Rusted Promise, requesting immediate contact with Kingdom Command. I have aboard a survivor claiming to be Princess Phaneira Kestrel. I say again, I have the princess aboard unharmed. Requesting escort and verification. The silence that followed stretched long enough that Dorian's stomach knotted with dread, and then the calm crackled to life. A woman's voice, sharp with a controlled desperation that told him everything about how long this fleet had been searching without hope. Rusted Promise, this is Kingdom Vessel Ember's Vow. Confirm, you claim to have the princess? I do. I found her in the Hauler 6 wreckage 20 days ago now. She's safe. She's healthy. She's right here. Dorian held the comm toward Finn, and she leaned in, small voice trembling but clear. This is Finn, she said. Pharaoh says hi too. There was a sound on the other end of the comm that might have been a sob, quickly swallowed, and then the voice returned, thick with barely restrained emotion. Stand by for escort, Rusted Promise. And thank you. Thank you, whoever you are. You have no idea what you've just done. The escort brought them not to a ship, but to a hidden kingdom base carved into the hollow core of an asteroid deep within the nebula, shielded, fortified, and Dorian learned as they were guided through corridor after reinforced corridor, currently serving as the Queen's own command center for the search that had consumed the kingdom for 3 weeks. Finn's hand found his as they walked, small fingers laced tight through his, her whole body vibrating with a nervous, desperate hope that made Dorian's chest ache. What if she's not here? Finn whispered. What if? Then we'll keep looking, Dorian said firmly. I promise you, remember? I don't stop until we know. They rounded a final corner into a command chamber full of officers and analysts. And every single one of them stopped, mid-motion, as a woman rose from the central command station so fast her chair clattered backward to the floor. She was tall, russet-furred like Sorrel had been, but with streaks of deep auburn through her tail, dressed in the practical uniform of someone who'd spent 3 weeks living in a command center rather than a palace. Her amber eyes, the same amber as Finn's, Dorian realized with a jolt, wide with a hope so raw it looked almost like pain. Finn, the woman breathed. Mommy! Finn tore her hand free of Dorian's and ran, small legs carrying her across the command chamber faster than Dorian had ever seen her move, and the queen of the Vulpine kingdom dropped to her knees without a shred of royal dignity, arms opening wide to catch her daughter as she crashed into them with a sob that seemed to shake the whole room. Mommy, Mommy, I found you, I found you. I'm here, the queen wept, clutching her daughter with a desperation that spoke of 3 weeks of terror finally breaking. I'm here, my little Ember, I'm here, I'm so sorry I couldn't come for you. Mister found me. Finn sobbed into her mother's shoulder. He found me and he kept me safe and he never let the bad ships get me and he promised he'd find you and he did, he kept his promise. The queen looked up then, over her daughter's shoulder, amber eyes wet, disbelieving, overwhelmed, finding Dorian standing awkwardly near the entrance, feeling suddenly, acutely out of place in a room full of royal officers and a reunion that felt too sacred for him to witness. You're the one, she said, voice breaking. You're the one who found her. Ah, yes, Your Majesty. Dorian dipped an awkward half-bow, entirely unsure of the correct protocol for meeting a queen while covered in 3 weeks of travel grime and healing plasma burns. Dorian Ash. I found her in the wreckage of Hauler 6. I've just been trying to get her back to you since. The queen rose, Finn still clinging to her side, and crossed the command chamber with a purposeful stride that had every officer in the room straightening to attention. She stopped in front of Dorian, and for a moment he thought she might strike him, or embrace him, or do something else entirely unpredictable. And instead she simply looked at him, searching his face with the same intense amber scrutiny her daughter had given him in the wreckage weeks ago. She told me you protected her, the queen said quietly. Outran fleets. Survived betrayal at Hollow Star. Was wounded defending her. Is that true? I did what anyone would have done, Dorian said, uncomfortable with the weight of her attention. No, the queen said, and her voice carried an authority that filled the room despite its quiet. You did not do what anyone would have done. Most who found her would have handed her to the nearest authority and walked away, or worse, seen the value of what they'd found and sold her to the highest bidder. You carried my daughter through a war zone for 3 weeks, Dorian Ash, at cost to yourself, expecting nothing in return. She reached out and took his hand, an unexpected, deeply personal gesture from a monarch, one that visibly startled the officers around them, and held it with both of hers. You brought my daughter home, she said, voice thick. There is no debt I could offer that would repay that. But I intend to try. Dorian, overwhelmed and exhausted and still faintly disbelieving that he was standing in a royal command center at all, found himself without words for the first time in the entire ordeal. He managed finally. I just couldn't leave her there. Finn, still clinging to her mother's side, looked up at him with a small, wobbly smile. Told you he was nice, Mommy. The queen laughed, a wet, exhausted, genuinely joyful sound, and pulled her daughter close again, and for the first time in 3 weeks, the command chamber of the Kestrel search fleet held something other than desperate hope. It held relief. The reunion, however, did not end the danger. A fact the queen made clear once the initial flood of emotion had given way to the colder calculations of a monarch whose kingdom was still at war. The Dominion will know within hours that Finn has been recovered, she told Dorian later that evening, in a private briefing chamber where he'd been summoned once Finn had finally, exhaustedly, fallen asleep in a proper bed for the first time in weeks. Their entire strategy depended on either capturing her or ensuring she was never found alive. Both outcomes are now closed to them. That makes them dangerous in a different way. What do you mean? Dorian asked. I mean, the queen said grimly, that a cornered enemy sometimes chooses to burn down what they cannot have. There is intelligence suggesting Dominion Command authorized a strike against this very base, contingent on confirmation that Finn was here. We have perhaps 6 hours before that confirmation reaches them, if it hasn't already. Dorian's stomach dropped. Then we need to move her. Now. We are already preparing evacuation, the queen confirmed. But I would ask something of you first, Dorian Ash, and you are entirely free to refuse. Anything. Finn has grown attached to you in a way I have never seen her attached to anyone outside our closest circle. In the coming hours, as we move to secure her safety, her presence beside someone she trusts completely may be the difference between calm cooperation and a terrified child slowing down an evacuation that cannot afford delay. Will you stay with her through the transition? Once she is safely at the capital, you would of course be free to go, with whatever reward the kingdom can offer for your service. Dorian didn't hesitate. I'm not leaving her until she's safe. Reward or not. The queen studied him for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her amber eyes. You say that very easily, for a man who has already given 3 weeks and a plasma wound to a child that was not his responsibility. She stopped feeling like someone else's responsibility a long time ago, Your Majesty, Dorian said quietly. Somewhere around the second night, When she had a nightmare and I was the one who held her until it passed. I don't really know how to walk away from that. I'm not sure I want to learn. Something shifted in the Queen's expression, surprise, and beneath it, something warmer. That is a rare kind of loyalty to find in someone with no obligation to give it. With respect, Your Majesty, I don't think loyalty like that runs on obligation. The Dominion strike came 4 hours later, not the full assault the Queen had feared, but a fast, brutal raiding force meant to hit hard and confirm the worst before Kingdom reinforcements could arrive. Dorian was in the evacuation corridor with Finn in his arms, half asleep and disoriented, when the base's alarms tore through the quiet with a violence that had every soldier in the corridor snapping into motion. Hostile breach, Sector 7. The comm blared. All non-combat personnel to evacuation shuttles immediately. Mister? Finn's voice, small and frightened, waking fully as the alarms shrieked around them. What's happening? We're leaving, Dorian said, tightening his grip on her, already moving fast down the corridor alongside a phalanx of Kingdom soldiers. It's okay, I've got you, just hold on tight. The evacuation shuttle bay was chaos. Soldiers forming defensive lines, officers shouting coordinates, the Queen herself standing at the center of it with a calm, commanding presence that belied the danger closing in around them. She caught sight of Dorian and Finn and moved toward them immediately, her own guard forming a tight perimeter. The shuttle's ready, she said, voice tight with controlled urgency. Get her aboard. I need to coordinate the base's defense until the last transport clears. You're not coming? Finn's voice cracked with sudden panic, small hands fisting in Dorian's jacket. Mommy, no, you have to come. I'll be right behind you, my Ember, the Queen said, cupping her daughter's face with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the chaos around them. I promise. But I need to make sure everyone gets out safely first. That's what a queen does. I don't want you to go, Finn sobbed. Not again. Please, not again. The Queen's composure cracked, just slightly, grief and fear flickering across her face before she forced it back into steadiness. I am not leaving you, Finn. I am protecting you, the same way I always have. Dorian will keep you safe until I get there. Do you trust him? Finn looked at Dorian, tears streaming down her small face, and then nodded, small and fierce. I trust him. Then trust me too, the Queen said. Go. Now. I love you more than anything in this galaxy, and I will see you at the rendezvous point within the hour. She pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead, then looked up at Dorian with an intensity that carried the full weight of the request beneath it. Protect her. With my life, Dorian said, and meant it completely. The shuttle broke atmosphere just as the first wave of Dominion raiders hit the base's outer defenses, the flash of distant weapons fire visible even through the shuttle's small viewport as they climbed away from the asteroid. Finn pressed herself against the glass, small hands flat on the transparent surface, watching the battle unfold beneath them with wide, terrified eyes. She'll be okay, Dorian said, kneeling beside her, though the words felt hollow even as he said them. He had no way to guarantee that promise, and they both knew it. Your mom's smart. She's tough. She's going to make it out. You don't know that, Finn whispered. No, Dorian admitted. I don't. But I believe it. And I'm going to believe it with you until we know for sure. Okay? Finn didn't answer, just pressed closer against his side, watching the flashes of distant battle recede into the black as the shuttle climbed toward the rendezvous coordinates, and Dorian held her through the longest, most agonizing 40 minutes of the entire ordeal. When the comm finally crackled to life with the Queen's voice, tired, singed with smoke, but unmistakably, gloriously alive, Finn's sob of relief was audible through half the shuttle. Rendezvous confirmed. Base secured, Dominion raiders repelled with heavy losses on their side. I'm coming to you now, my Ember. I'm coming. Finn looked up at Dorian with a smile so bright, so relieved, that it physically hurt to see. She's okay, Finn breathed. She's okay, mister. She's okay, Dorian agreed, and felt something in his own chest finally unclench. 3 weeks later, the Vulpine capital of Orlith's Spire had transformed from a city bracing for grief into one celebrating a homecoming. The princess's return broadcast across the kingdom's networks, the attempted Dominion raid on the search base spun by war-weary diplomats into the beginning of ceasefire negotiations either side could afford to refuse any longer. Not with the galaxy watching to see what would happen to a rescued child at the center of it all. Dorian found himself an uncomfortable celebrity in the palace's sprawling gardens, given a suite of rooms he felt entirely undeserving of and a level of hospitality that made his years of scraping by as an independent salvager feel like a different life entirely. He found Finn there most afternoons, in the garden's quiet corner beneath a canopy of silver-leaf trees, still carrying Pharaoh despite the palace's offer of 100 new toys, still seeking him out with the same unguarded trust she'd offered him in the wreckage of Hauler 6. "Mommy says I have to do lessons now," Finn told him one afternoon, flopping down onto the garden bench beside him with the particular dramatic exhaustion only a child could produce over something as mundane as schooling. "History and politics and boring stuff. Sounds rough," Dorian said, hiding a smile. "Being a princess again. It's not the same as being on your ship," she said, quieter now, picking at a loose thread on Pharaoh's remaining button eye. "I liked it there. Even the scary parts. Because you were there." Dorian felt something tighten in his chest. The conversation he'd known was coming, had been dreading in the quiet hours since their arrival, finally arriving whether he was ready or not. "Finn," he said carefully, "I think your mom's going to want to talk to me soon. About what happens next." Finn's ears drooped, her small hands stilling on the stuffed fox. "You're going to leave?" "I don't know," Dorian admitted honestly. "That's not up to just me anymore." The summons came the next morning, a formal audience with the Queen, in a private chamber rather than the throne room, which Dorian took as a small mercy given how thoroughly unprepared he was for court formality. The Queen received him alone, dressed not in royal regalia but in simpler clothes, looking more like the exhausted, grateful mother from the command chamber than the commanding monarch from the battle at the search base. "Dorian Ashe," she said, gesturing him to a seat across from her. "I have spent 3 weeks trying to determine how to properly thank the man who saved my daughter's life, and I confess I remain uncertain such a thing is possible. But I have an offer, and I would ask you to hear it fully before you respond." "I'm listening, Your Majesty." "You could return to independent salvage, of course, with whatever reward the kingdom's treasury can provide, enough, I assure you, to never need to scrape by on dangerous salvage contracts again. That offer stands regardless of anything else I say. You have more than earned it." Dorian nodded slowly, waiting for the rest. "But," the Queen continued, "Finn has asked me, every day since our reunion, whether you would be staying. She has grown attached to you in a way that transcends simple gratitude, Dorian, and I would be lying if I claimed the attachment was hers alone. I have watched the way she looks for you in a room. I have watched the way you look for her in return. And I find myself extending an offer I have never extended to anyone outside the kingdom's own people." She met his eyes, steady and sincere. "A place here, if you want it. Not as a servant, not as a debt repaid, but as someone woven into my daughter's life permanently, in whatever capacity feels right to you. Guardian. Protector. Family, if that word doesn't frighten you too badly. The choice is entirely yours, and I promise you, whatever you decide, my gratitude does not diminish." Dorian sat with the weight of the offer for a long moment, feeling the pull of 2 lives tugging against each other. The quiet, lonely, familiar rhythm of the rusted promise and 11 years of solitary salvage work, against the chaotic, terrifying, achingly warm months he just lived through, against the small orange-furred girl who called him Mr. and trusted him with a fierceness that had rearranged something fundamental in his chest. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Of course. Why me?" "You could have 100 trained guardians, palace security, people with actual qualifications for protecting a princess. Why offer this to some salvager who stumbled into all this by accident? The Queen's expression softened into something almost wistful. Because Finn did not need a trained guardian in that wreckage, Dorian. She needed someone who would choose to stay, again and again, when it would have been easier not to. She needed someone who saw a frightened child instead of a political prize. That is not a quality that can be trained. It either exists in a person, or it does not. She paused. It exists in you. I watched you carry her through a war zone with nothing to gain and everything to lose. I do not offer this lightly, and I do not offer it out of obligation. I offer it because my daughter loves you, and because, foolishly, perhaps, for a queen who has learned to trust almost no one, I have come to as well. Dorian felt his throat tighten, the weeks of exhaustion and fear and fierce protectiveness finally catching up with him all at once. I don't know how to be anything other than a mechanic who got in over his head, he admitted quietly. Then be that, the Queen said simply. Be exactly that here, with us, instead of alone out there. Finn does not need you to be anything other than what you already are, Dorian. None of us do. He found Finn exactly where he expected. The garden bench beneath the silver trees, Pharaoh in her lap, watching the door with the particular anxious hope of a child who learned the hard way that people she loved didn't always come back. She saw his face and went very still. You talked to Mommy, she said. I did. Are you leaving? Dorian crossed the garden and sat down beside her, and for a long moment he just looked at her. Small and orange-furred and fierce, the same girl who'd asked him a devastating question in a frozen wreck weeks ago, and never quite let go of his heart since. I've spent 11 years alone on that ship, he said slowly. Just me and Mabel, drifting between salvage jobs, not really belonging anywhere. I got used to it. Told myself it was fine. He paused. Then I found a scared kid asking about her mommy, and somewhere between there and here, I stopped being okay with just drifting. Finn's eyes went wide, hope warring visibly with the fear of hoping too much. I'm staying, Dorian said, and watching her whole small face crack open into the brightest smile he'd ever seen was worth every dangerous mile of the journey that had brought them here. If that's okay with you. Finn didn't answer with words. She just launched herself off the bench and into his arms with enough force to knock the breath out of him. Small arms wrapped tight around his neck, Pharaoh squished between them, and Dorian held her close and laughed, a real, unguarded, joyful sound he hadn't made in longer than he could remember. You're staying, Finn said into his shoulder, half laughing, half crying. You're really staying. I'm really staying, Dorian confirmed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Someone's got to keep an eye on you, kid. Sounds like a full-time job. Best job, Finn said, pulling back just enough to grin at him, amber eyes bright with a happiness that no longer had a single shadow of the wreckage in it. You're the best job. Behind them, unnoticed until that moment, the Queen stood in the garden doorway, watching the two of them with an expression of quiet, profound relief. A mother who had feared she'd lost everything, watching her daughter laugh freely in the arms of the man who'd carried her home. Some promises, Dorian thought, holding Finn close beneath the silver trees, weren't meant to end once they were kept. Some of them were just the beginning.